I grind for the love of the game, watching March Madness through a fantasy lens. We grind for the love of the game. Scouting next year's rookie class is done best with a friend. Welcome back to PTJ, everybody. It is Thursday night, April 4th, right before the Final Four kicks off on Saturday. I hope that your fantasy playoffs are in the books. If not, I hope you're managing your drinking this week. One benefit to ending your playoffs at the end of week 21 or being eliminated early or a combo of both is it frees one up to focus on the NCAA tournament. And if you're anything like your old boy Flyin J, that means you're already thinking about next year's rookie class. The class is down compared to last year, but there's still plenty of talent. So today on the pod, we're going to focus on college basketball prospects in particular. Speaking of friends, unfortunately, Natron Clean could not join us today. He is on a work trip in the fine state of Arizona, but I'm happy to report that he was recently able to take his daughters to see UConn. Natron Clean is originally from Connecticut, to the women's Sweet 16 in Portland. So he's been getting very much into the March Madness spirit. Natron also attended the Pac-12 men's tournament in Vegas with some of the boys from the League of Record, where shockingly, Oregon was victorious. It's a shame to know that he felt so much joy. Okay, I miss him, but I digress. Today, for the second year in a row, we will turn to one of the biggest college basketball junkies I, or hopefully anyone, has ever met. And that person is, of course, the brilliant and charismatic Caden Millerin. Hello, Caden. Welcome to Projecting the Jump.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Glad to be back. Had fun last year. Looking forward to some Final Four this year. We got Purdue in the Final Four for the first time in over 40 years, so I'm excited about that. Got some students
Congratulations.
actually heading to Arizona to check out the Final Four because of Purdue's being there.
Let's go. That's awesome. Yeah. So,
Pretty
Caden,
excited.
you're doubly sworn to Gonzaga and Purdue. No, ultimately, who's your true laundry? You're a laundry bro, as they call them, for who?
Yeah. So I found myself when I was watching the Sweet 16 matchup between the two teams, really mostly wanting a good game, but I've been a Gonzaga fan my entire life, and I did actually find myself sort of pulling for them in that game, knowing that either way, I'm going to have one of my top two teams in the Elite Eight, and ultimately, that's not such a bad thing to exist.
Let me ask you
Not a
this
bad place.
question. So, having two teams in particular, over the years when you're creating a bracket, how much does your homerism sneak into your picks? Like, are you able to check it? Do you use it as an advantage because you have a better understanding of how the teams may actually perform, or how is that factored in for you?
It's an interesting question. I have a problem where I watch basketball, college basketball all year long, and I take lots of notes. And throughout a season, I'll pick here are my favorite teams to like have an upset if they make it into the tournament.
Nice.
Um, and then what ends up happening inevitably is two teams that I really like that that I think could make a run match up in the first round. That happened this year with St. Mary's and Grand Canyon. Grand Canyon
Mhm.
was one of my top picks to make a run. They've got Bryce Drew coaching there. He's got college basketball coaching pedigree. His brother is at Baylor. His dad coached in the state of Indiana uh, at Valparaiso. So I just really liked that team, and I really liked St. Mary's as well. And so it's an unfortunate thing. I had to end up going with my gut and my heart, and I picked St. Mary's to make a deep run, and it didn't work out for me. So I have a problem where I end up bracketing with my heart a little bit too much
Bracketing with my
because,
heart.
yeah, exactly. And it's more fun that way in the moment. I started off really poorly in my Purdue pool bracket pool. I'm currently situated with the second best odds at winning. That said, the person in my pool who currently has the lead is in the 99.9th percentile, so it's
Ooh.
probably not going.
My goodness. What's interesting, so I had St. Mary's going pretty far in a couple of brackets too, and that one hurt. Grand Canyon is a private Christian for-profit university. That's a lot of things to be.
Hmm. Yeah, it is a lot. The way, yeah, there's the way that you know, religion and faith can become commodified in this country, and under capitalism is an interesting thing.
Oh, oh,
Also, I
oh.
think that both teams have some of the more interesting team names in the tournament.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that last part because my socialist meter was going off.
I just thought that it was a matchup with two interesting team names.
Yes,
Uh, the Antelopes and the Gales. The Gales just meaning of Gaelic origin, which I think was
sure.
kind of cool.
Yeah, no, that was they were exciting to watch. I think everybody got on board, but they just looked really athletic. Like they looked the part there.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget that shot that Bryce Drew hit for Valparaiso. I feel like at least for our generation, that kind of began the March Madness thing. Like that's the
Yeah,
first shot that I remember.
that's the first moment I think about when I think about like classic March Madness moments. It's like what a well-designed, cool play that is.
Dude, 100%. So, how we're going to kind of structure this is we're going to get into some teams in particular that have prospects that we want to talk about. We're going to talk about how they are ranked right now, kind of what we think about them, and I'll put a little fantasy spin on it as we go through. So this information is beneficial to the fantasy player. We're always trying to collect information, but we definitely want to approach it from more of like a couch scout lens where we're just talking about the players in general. So just for the listener, a little heads up on that. So we are going to start with some University of Kentucky players here now. This is a team that it's funny because their last title was in 2012, and you would think the way that their fan base talks that they hadn't won one since 1972. But that's what happens when you set expectations so high. And to be fair, these losses have been historic. And this last one in particular was painful. So shout out to the UK Bay, and I'm sorry for what you went through that day. But traditionally, Caden, the University of Kentucky's got themselves into a bit of a conundrum because, as we know, they, with John Calipari at the helm, masters of recruiting. They are great at recruiting players on paper. They're always stacked. And then when we try to figure out, okay, how are they going to translate to the next level? I think sometimes their players have trouble showing, and you and I talked about this, they have trouble showing their entire skill set while they're at Kentucky. There are endless examples: Tyler Hero, Devin Booker, Tyrese Maxey, to a lesser extent, Shea Gilgeous-Alexander. These guys were all still developing into the players that they became. And so when we're looking at the players we're going to talk about today, I want to consider that Kentucky has an incredible track record, and so there's always meat left on the bones. But at the same time, that can also influence what we think of these prospects because they hit so often. How do you kind of wrestle with that balance? How do you balance that those factors?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I think obviously you pulled up a list right now of all the Kentucky players in the league. It's pretty astonishing. And it seems like a pretty safe bet to go with a Kentucky guard, which is
Right.
perhaps why Dillingham and Reed Sheppard have been, because of how well they've played in college basketball, but they've also been, up at the top of a lot of mock drafts, despite some size limitations. Um, yeah, it's an interesting thing because you have examples of players who went to Kentucky and the teams are loaded and they take on a different role than they've ever had before. And sometimes it's difficult to find what exactly your niche with that offensive ecosystem is going to be because you're being transplanted into a situation that's so new. I mean, if you're one of these guys who's a top 10 player in high school, in all likelihood, you've constantly been the best player on your own team, and now you're kind of being confronted with a lot of peer talent. And some players are able to figure that out sooner than others. Some players really struggle with it. So it's hard sometimes to project where some of these Kentucky players are going to end up.
Yeah, I think that's really fair. That makes a ton of sense. Let's go ahead and get into the prospects first. It's funny because before I even knew the rankings and where they were at, I watched a lot of Kentucky games, and Rob Dillingham jumped off the page to me as the player that just seemed to have that it factor as far as the ceiling potential going to the next level. So the Ringer has their NBA draft guide, the first edition out, and so Kevin O'Connor, he has Dillingham 7th. And then shout out to Hoop Intellect. And Caden, I want you to give a little plug because you turned me on to them. And I've been watching some of their videos in preparation of this podcast. They have Dillingham at number 6. So, they're in agreement there. So Hoop Intellect, just a little bit. Why is that something you've been using? It seems like a pretty smart guys over there. But what can you say about Hoop Intellect?
Yeah, well, so I had been looking for some maybe non-mainstream sources because I find oftentimes that a lot of those end up becoming rehashings of
Yep.
each other's rankings. I also find a lot of frustration in them sometimes when they're putting together mock drafts and some of the draft selections just don't make any sense. The number of times I've seen, somebody through some mainstream uh, uh, publication having the Blazers taking another 6'3" guard at like the 5 spot this year, it's kind of frustrating. And I think that these guys are oftentimes people who cover multiple sports, and so I don't know how much of an expert as an NBA scout evaluator they really are. I found Hoop Intellect on YouTube and just found that he formulates a lot of his own opinions. He's not afraid to diverge from consensus, but he'll also explain really sort of intelligently why he does make those divergences. And he'll make his own concessions and he'll concede to some when he's wrong, but he seems like just a guy who's really plugged in as a scout, who really watches a ton of film, gives really simple um, breakdowns of players' games and comparisons and things like that. And he's not concerned at this point of the year with putting together a mock draft.
Yes,
He
that's the
has a big
key.
board. He's doing that over and over and over again, and so it feels
Mhm.
a lot less like I don't know, thirsty for attention or anything like that. I think he's just really plugged in and he knows what he's doing and he enjoys doing it.
Really well said. It felt very anti-clickbait to me.
Yeah.
And so for that reason, I really want us to focus today on these players as prospects. We're not going to talk a lot about theoretical landing spots. I don't think that's too useful here. We said at the beginning of April. I want to look at these are players that we've seen a lot of them in the tournament, or coming out of their conference tournaments. And so we're focused on them as prospects today. So back to Rob Dillingham. He is a 6'1", 175-pound guard. The Ringer has him comped to shades of Lou Williams. I really liked that one. Bones Highland as an electric bucket getter who is starting to develop as a playmaker. He reminded me a little bit of Tyrese Maxey when I watched him as college players, in that at times he could seem a bit erratic with the ball, but he just had so much talent and he's hunting for his opportunities. And so when it really came together, for instance, he had a 35-point game against Tennessee, who made a deep tournament run. You saw these incredible flashes. What do you think of Dillingham overall as a prospect as he gets ready for the NBA draft?
I really enjoy watching Rob Dillingham. Like you said, he kind of pops off the page. He's really quick. He's a guy who, on any given night, I think, can give you a bunch of buckets. He doesn't totally play above the rim, but he's capable of it, and he's a surprisingly good athlete when he decides to demonstrate it. Yeah, so I think once he's in the NBA and he'll probably be somewhat less of a focal point offensively. The court's wider, more people around him to spread the floor and things like that. I think he's going to be a very good offensive player in the league. Obviously, he's limited with size. 6'1" is probably not your favorite size for your lead guard to be, but I think he can make up for that with speed and just general shot making ability. I think he could be a really interesting pick and roll partner, especially with where it's looking like he could possibly end up going is something like if he ends up becoming a pick and roll partner with somebody like Victor Wembanyama, that could be
Ooh,
a lot of fun.
that's a great point. Yeah, I think that highlights how his skill set could translate well to the pros, because when you get higher level players around him, those tendencies that he has, just creating his own shot, but also, like you said, the pick and roll. He's a great cutter. He moves really well without the ball. I think he seems like he plays with a really high IQ. So yeah, 6'1" isn't ideal, but I think that's why KOC had him comp to someone like Lou Williams.
Yeah.
Ultimately, maybe he is just like a super spark plug off the bench. Maybe he's your first guy off the bench, comes in and gets buckets against second units, and run him a little bit with the first team as well.
Yeah, I think he could be a really awesome spark plug offensively off the bench for a team. I think that would be a great role for him, which is what he did in Kentucky as well. Um, yeah, I kind of look forward to seeing what happens with him. I
Yeah,
like those players that are just like super quick. Um, he won't have to force the issue as much at the next level. I'm excited.
totally. So we're on the same page in Dillingham. So this next player kind of highlights to me why this is a bit of a weaker class. Somebody who watched Reed Sheppard throughout his first. And I'll say this is I know somebody who is friends with his girlfriend, so which is ridiculous, but my partner, she's from Kentucky, and so her friend's cousin is dating Reed Sheppard, a very long-term relationship. And the word through those channels is that Reed Sheppard might actually come back, that his parents are from the area. That's been his dream the whole time, is to play at Kentucky. His parents are fairly well to do, and I don't have the numbers on that, but like he doesn't, let's just say he doesn't necessarily need to buy his mom a house. Like he doesn't have any of those pressures on him. So don't be surprised if Reed Sheppard ends up coming back for a sophomore season, but we'll proceed as if he's in the 2024 draft. Just a little nugget for you. So Reed Sheppard, he's a guard, freshman, 6'3", 187 pounds. The Ringer has him as the 6th rated prospect, hoop intellect at 10. This one jumped out to me. The Ringer has shades of Derek White. He is a great on-ball defender. I don't know if he has the athleticism of a Derek White, but he really can get in there and block some shots. He has deep range. He can put the ball on the floor and attack a little bit. But again, having him as a potential top 5 pick, I would think ideally in an average to above average draft, you would be looking at Reed Sheppard in, the range that a Grady Dick or a Tyler Hero went. You wouldn't necessarily want to be taking him with a top 5 pick, but I really do like the player. I just think that the ceiling probably is 4th best player on a playoff team. I don't see a ceiling for him that he could get a couple all-star nods, but then again, I'm kind of speculating, but what's your take on Reed Sheppard's ceiling as an NBA player?
Yeah, I don't entirely know. I've also been a little bit surprised at how high he has been at times. There was a moment I remember at one point in the season, and I was going through and looking at big boards and things like that. And I saw a couple times him getting top 3 recognition. And just thinking, I don't know about that. He's a very nice player. And for what it's worth, I'm not like an NBA scout or talent evaluator. I'm just a basketball enjoyer. But he's obviously an incredible 3-point shooter. He's a great shot maker. I don't know how much um, shot creation for other people he'll be able to produce at the next level. And I think when you're looking at taking a player that high, that's an element that you want. And he's small. He's 6'3", which and he's not a point guard really. He's going to be a shooting guard in the NBA, and so that does come with, even if you're saying that you like some of his defensive intuition, like that comes with challenges at the NBA when he's going to be guarding people a lot bigger, a lot stronger than him. And so I think that there are limitations defensively that I would be a little bit worried about, and just size in general. I think, him being a 6'3" shooting guard comes with bigger issues than Dillingham being a 6'1" point guard.
Agreed. Or a combo guard scorer off the bench, and he's more
Yeah.
athletic. Dillingham, yeah. No,
So
that's a good point.
it'll be interesting to see. Obviously, he can really shoot the ball. And to your point earlier on about him possibly returning for a second season at Kentucky, which is not something that I had heard about. I wonder if there's any motivation there with having had such a good season and then just entirely
Oh my God.
underperforming in the tournament game.
That's my
Has
question, Caden.
do with it.
That's my question, and I apologize to Big Blue Nation, but it needs to be asked. The fact that his one collegiate playoff game or tournament game, it was hard to watch. I mean, he just wasn't prepared to play. It was crazy. I mean, he just looked like the moment was too big for him. He finally hit the 1-3 for, I would say, I don't know, early into the second half. I thought, okay. And ironically enough, him and Dillingham both came off the bench. This team was so loaded throughout the season. That needs to be noted. But I was like, you got to get this guy out of the game. You can't have, he just wasn't ready, and he got a deep team. And, he came back in off a timeout and just jacked up an ill-advised 3 that didn't need to be put up. And that was kind of the end. And it's interesting because if Calipari thinks that, this is speculatory, if Calipari thinks there's a chance he comes back, maybe that's a little more incentive to put a player back into a game and draw up a play for him. That if that was the play, do you remember that 3 I'm talking about, that he just came back in, it was about 35 seconds left, just jacked it up. I couldn't believe to see that shot. But hey, I mean, if he thinks he's coming back, then maybe you just give him those reps.
Yeah.
So
yeah, this is the first I've heard about him possibly coming back. That would be a really interesting story. I mean, He'd be coming in as, preseason All-American,
Right, exactly.
which is not something that's super common anymore.
Speaking, Kata, of coming in as a preseason All-American, we continue down the UK list here. So Justin Edwards was number 3 in the entire 2023 class for ESPN, for Rivals, and for 247 Sports. This is a 6'8" wing, 203 pounds. The Ringer has him 45th. Hoop Intellect has him 54th. I think that's much too low. And we talked a little bit about this off air, and there have been instances of players that, they're just doesn't translate once they get to the college level. And it was an ambitious number that they came in with for their class. But we've also seen time and time again, players just not get a sizable enough role or find their footing in their 1 year in college, but particularly at Kentucky. So how are you balancing that out when kind of grading out Justin Edwards as a prospect?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. It's because, like you mentioned earlier, and what we talked about, where sometimes you just enter a new offensive ecosystem and you struggle to find a niche. And if you're naturally a less assertive player, then maybe you do just struggle. He was not coming in expected to be like an excellent 3-point shooter or anything like that. And so when he's not involved offensively as much, he can kind of just become almost like a spectator. And there are moments where this isn't exactly the same thing, but you get players like at Kentucky who are now all-star level players who were not taken super high.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Devin Booker, Tyrese Maxey. And so I think it's an interesting thing. And a note on Justin Edwards, when I've watched him at times, what I've noticed is, and I mentioned this just a moment ago, is he just sometimes feels not involved in the offense.
Yeah.
He's watching, he's not asserting himself. You did mention that he is a decent cutter. And I was thinking about this. I was thinking about highly ranked basketball players coming in to play their first and only season of college. There are 2 recent college basketball players that come to mind for me who had like the same problem, where they were really highly ranked, sometimes just did not get involved offensively at all. And you wondered, like, why is this person being so unassertive? And so this gives you, I think, a pretty good breadth of difference between these 2 guys. And Justin Edwards could maybe fall anywhere between them. One of them is Brandon Ingram. Both of these players I'm going to mention happen to be players at Duke. There were times when you'd watch Brandon Ingram at Duke and he was electric, and it was like you could totally understand the Kevin Durant comparisons, and it made a ton of sense. And then there would just be stretches in games where he would just stand in the corner and just not do anything. And I think Justin Edwards has a little bit of a tendency to do that. The other player, and this is another prime example of coming in a loaded draft class and maybe just not finding your niche, but he also hasn't quite found his role in the NBA either, is
Amani Bates.
No, it's oh my gosh, Cam Reddish.
Cam Reddish is a great one. Bates is a good one too. I mean, yeah, there are countless examples.
Bates,
Everybody swears on Cam Reddish as far as players in his class, in his age bracket. They still think that Cam Reddish is that guy, which is interesting.
I know.
Yeah.
He's apparently like a really great locker room guy too. Like people love him. For whatever reason, it hasn't panned out. So those are just 2 examples of guys who I saw having maybe a similar sort of issue with terms of how active or inactive they could be. One of them is obviously an all-star in the league, and the other one is still struggling to find a role. So my thought on Justin Edwards is he's probably going to fall somewhere. And if you are a young team willing to take a risk early in the 2nd round and your name comes up and he's still there, I would probably take a swing on him.
That's my opinion too. And it's funny because that totally translates to how I feel about the 4th Kentucky player we'll talk about today. That player is DJ Wagner. This is a combo guard, 6'4", 192 pounds, freshman. The Ringer has him 56, Hoop Intellect at 40th. So quite the discrepancy there. Fun fact on DJ Wagner, he will be, when he puts on that NBA jersey, the first 3rd-generation NBA player. His pops was Wagner. I believe was drafted by Cleveland. He did not pan out. He had a lot of game. He lasted in the NBA from 2002 to 2007. And his gramps, Milt Wagner, good old Milt, played from 87 to 91. I'm sorry, Milt, I'm not familiar with your game. But his grandson's game, DJ Wagner, uber athletic player. I really think he's one of these guys that in the right situation could pop. Now, I would use an early second round pick on him if I was a team like the Bucks come to mind, a team that just needs some upside on the bench, that it's worth taking a shot on a player like DJ Wagner. So him and Justin Edwards kind of fit into that same mold. But overall, if I had to choose, and as far as whose game could translate to fantasy better, I like DJ Wagner. So it'll be interesting to see where those guys go. But yeah, DJ Wagner, did you get a feel for him? I know, it kind of flew by quickly. And
yeah. First and foremost, I want to address something that needs addressed.
yes.
Okay. That's NBA champion Milt Wagner.
I apologize.
1988 champion with the Los Angeles
with
Lakers.
the Lakers. Okay. Word.
Yeah, he had a couple short stints in the NBA as well. So while he will be the third generation of his family to be playing in the NBA, hopefully he will have a longer career than either of the two that came before him. I'm mostly in agreement with you. I think that I was reading a statistic recently that in college basketball this season, and this was a couple weeks ago, so this could have changed a little bit, but DJ Wagner was in the 93rd percentile on catch and shoot threes.
Wow.
That's a valuable skill set that it's going to translate.
That's a great stat.
There's no reason that something like that shouldn't translate. And he's not going to be a primary or secondary defensive focus from other teams.
No.
So I think you get a decently sized combo guard who can shoot the three. And if that's all he can ever do, it's a valuable NBA asset. I think he's worth taking a second round pick, especially if, like you said, you need a little bit of offensive creation or shooting off the bench. That's the kind of role he's going to have in the NBA.
Well said. Well said. Eventually, I promise to you, the listener, we will stop talking about Kentucky players. Just going to squeeze one more in there because he's an interesting upside case, and that is prepare for a butchering. Ugonna Onyenso. He is a center. He's a 7-foot, 240-pound center. He's actually a sophomore. The Ringer does not have him in their top 60. Hoop and Select has him at number 58. Interesting. This is a shot blocking specialist at this point, and he set a single game block record for any UK player in a home game last season with 10 blocks against Ole Miss. So from a fantasy perspective, we're interested in that because if he can crack a rotation, that's a block streamer waiting to happen, and blocks are hard to come by. Sometimes that's all you're looking for on a Saturday or Sunday. So Ugonna Onyenso is a player that played sparingly, and yeah, he interests me because we're always looking for a 7-footer who can block shots. Are you familiar with his game, and do you have a better pronunciation of his last name?
I don't, and I don't really have a ton to add to that. This archetype of a player is interesting because
it is.
A similar player, not like terribly long ago, was taken with the 3rd overall pick. If you want to go back to Hasheem Thabeet,
oh boy,
out of UConn.
Hey man, if you can get Thabeet at pick 58, that's fine.
Yeah, exactly. So it's interesting, just kind of the way the valuations have changed a little bit. I don't have a ton to add there, but what I will say is another guy to look out for if you need blocks, and if he can somehow break into a roster or break into a rotation, I should say, Ibu Baji. Currently riding the bench for the Portland Trail Blazers, one of the worst basketball teams in the NBA. So maybe he never will quite get there. But he had a moment in a game this year against New York where he blocked Julius Randle like 3 times in a row. And it really flustered Julius. It was pretty interesting to watch. So sorry to derail a little bit there, but just a thought I had.
No, that's good stuff. There's actually quite a bit of shot blocking upside in this draft. There are a lot of players who either are just straight up shot blockers, or one of them interests me is that, and we'll get back, but a freshman at Baylor. I'm gonna butcher his name. It's Yves Misi.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about? How do you say that
Yeah.
first
Yeah.
name?
Yeah. I think you pronounced that right.
Well, thank you.
Um,
Yeah, he's interesting to me. The Ringer has him as shades of Jalen Durin at number 21. I'm going a little off script here, but this draft is packed with some shot blockers. So maybe if that's what you're looking for, then you can find it in this year's draft. But yeah, there's a lot of names that fit that profile in this year's draft. I don't know what to make of this Johnny Furphy kid from Kansas.
it's such a stupid name.
I know.
Listen, listen. The two recent white boys from Kansas being named Grady Dick and Johnny Furphy is just. This feels like a 30 Rock bit or something.
It's so good.
Uh,
Okay.
yeah, Furphy's interesting, and I've seen him all over boards. Where does
Mhm.
the Ringer have him? And
Ringer has him.
what are their descriptions of him?
Ringer has him
They
at
have fun little.
Yeah, they do. It's a nice place to start. They have him at 34. Hoop Intellect had him much higher. I want to say low 20s, about I think around
Yeah.
number 20. And shades of for the Ringer, shades of Cam Johnson or Dougie McDermott.
Ah,
Yeah, a skilled shooter, a catch and shoot guy. He's got a bit of a wingspan to him. He's got the fancy boy haircut. So
yeah.
yeah,
I was actually going to liken him to Grady Dick. That's maybe the lazy thing to do here in real time, but I think similar profile. Kansas is an interesting team because they came in ranked first overall preseason, and they had some injury issues, and uh, they have a great white Hunter Dickinson whose career just ended a little bit prematurely in the tournament. Yeah, another name there for you.
maybe a great
Um,
white light.
yeah,
And
so that's interesting. And to your point about some of the discrepancies in player rankings on big boards is, I think in a lot of ways, and this happens in lots of drafts, and I think it's happening here. There's like a third tier of players in the draft that can kind of range that includes maybe like 30 players that are kind of all within the same tier, and at that point it becomes a little bit about an evaluator's preferences,
yes.
things that they like or dislike a little bit more. It's so close that even when guys are maybe 15 picks apart in different big boards, the actual discrepancy in how they're being viewed by those people might not be so large as that difference in number indicates.
Yeah, no, that's well said. It is a game of margins that we play in fantasy and when scouting actual players, I can imagine. Let's get in, Kate, into those Colorado boys because interestingly enough, a team that begrudgingly joined the Pac-12, awkwardly enough, and they've really been recruiting some talent over there. In particular, Cody Williams. This
Yep.
is a player that just oozes what the NBA is looking for as far as a long, rangy 6'8" wing. The Ringer has him ninth. Hoop Intellect has him fourth. The Ringer has shades of Jalen Rose, so a dynamic finisher and a big playmaker with an impressive defensive toolkit. Just by the way, shout out Kevin O'Connor. You are the GOAT at this, and I really appreciate you. So I want to make sure I'm sourcing your work properly. But Cody Williams, what do you think of him? Seeing him as a potential top 5 pick and kind of fits that profile of what NBA teams are looking for. Do you liken him to any recent prospects? Do you find his game to be special, exceptional, or is he more of an outline? Where do you lie on him?
Yeah, good question. So for the listeners who may not be aware, this is Cody Williams
Yeah,
is the brother of Oklahoma City's Jalen Williams, younger brother.
The Bronco.
So the success that I'll just say this: early career success that Jalen Williams has enjoyed is certainly not a detriment to Cody Williams'
Yeah,
case.
yeah, yeah.
I think people look at that as a sort of um, outline for what kind of player Cody Williams can be. That said, they are different profiles. Cody Williams is a couple inches taller. I believe Jalen Williams is 6'5", 6'6".
Yep.
Uh, Cody
Success.
Williams is taller. He's longer. He's thinner. But I do think that they are similar in that they both project to do a little bit of everything forwards. And that includes both sides of the ball, which is really intriguing. Jalen Williams took 3 years in college before he was starting to really get, NBA level looks, particularly, top half of the first round kind of looks. And he ended up getting taken like 11th or 10th or something like
So
that.
interesting. Yeah. And
Yeah.
unique journey for a player who's a budding superstar now.
Yeah, very interesting. It just took a little while for his body to develop, to work on some things. But so there was some sort of expectation that that would be the case for Cody Williams as well, especially because he is longer and thinner. And so this is the kind of player that one of the concerns is you would hope that they can fill their body out a little bit more.
Yeah, 180
Um,
is crazy for a player 6'8".
yeah. And one of the concerns was they didn't know how good of a outside shooter he was ever going to be.
Okay.
In his first season at Colorado, he shot right around 40% from three. So that's really encouraging, albeit only on about 2 attempts a game. So he is a selective shooter from out there. But what he's really good at offensively is he plays very contained. He doesn't feel like he's forcing stuff up. He's really good at finishing through contact at the rim. And then he's a pretty solid free throw shooter as well. I think he can also be a pretty good connecting piece offensively. Where I think he's limited is at the moment, I don't see a lot of creation for other players. And I think there's a little bit of limited creation for self too. But he's shooting at an efficient level. He's a good finisher. And then defensively, he's a really like intuitive defensive player. I think he projects to probably, be a good point of attack defensive player. Maybe not, an all NBA defensive guy or anything necessarily, but potentially there. And I think just like a really, really solid defensive player who's going to get steals, who's going to get blocks, and who hopefully his limited 3-point shooting in college is indicative of what he's going to be able to do in the NBA. So,
okay, yeah, that was really well said. I'm kind of digesting all that. I'm wondering if he is going to be able to add some of the playmaking that's made his brother Jalen Williams such a valuable fantasy commodity, and that you're getting the scoring. He's actually in blocks and steals. He's incredible. His defense translates statistically. So I'm kind of wondering if Cody Williams is still working on that part of his game. And he's only 19 years old.
yeah. And that's what I was going to say is, again, Cody Williams had the additional 2 college years to work on this. Yep. Another thing that's worth mentioning is that Cody Williams has kind of been saddled with minor injuries throughout the season. And this stunted a little bit of Colorado's progress later on in the season. He was able to return for the tournament, but not at 100%. So if you watched him play in the tournament and you didn't see him popping off the screen, that might be a little bit of it. He's been dealing with a wrist and an ankle injury and some kind of like facial injury as well. It's just kind of been like a little bit beat up in a lot of different places. And so some of this is, we're not entirely certain, but if you think he has a very similar disposition to Jalen Williams, they grew up together, obviously. And if you think that, his progress should sort of map onto the way that Jalen Williams progressed over his 3 years in college, that this is a pick people are talking about taking high and being a little bit patient about.
Okay, that's the patience is really useful for the fantasy listener. So, if you play in a league that's dynasty or a keeper league, maybe move Cody Williams up a little bit. We're going to get a lot more information, but maybe a first-year player, he could be a wait-and-see guy, not somebody you're going to have to necessarily draft, depending on landing spot, of course. Now, again, Cody Williams, 9th on the Ringers Big Board, 4th on Hoop Intellect. Now, here's an interesting guy. We're going to get into Tristan da Silva here, Caden. He is kind of a small forward, power forward, just a general wing, 6'9", 220. He's a senior. The Ringer has him 18th. Hoop Intellect has him 26. They have shades of slow-mo Kyle Anderson, which makes sense when you watch film of this guy. He kind of moves at his own pace. He's kind of robotic in some of his motions, getting into his shot. Solid all-around player, doesn't seem to be spectacular in any one area, which can make him a classic, not to keep using Jaime Jaquez as an example, but a ready-made role player for a contender is kind of how I see him. A player that I probably wouldn't draft before the late teens, depending on what I'm looking for. But what do you think about Tristan da Silva?
Yeah, Tristan da Silva is a really interesting player to watch at like the collegiate level, because like you said, he doesn't jump off the page with any one particular asset. He's not super athletic. He's not super fast. But he just does a lot of things well. And I think he figures to be a pretty good connecting piece offensively and defensively.
He looks about 34 years old really well. He does that well.
Yeah.
He looks like he could have been in a production of Grease.
Yes. Yeah. He could play Kaneki. uh, yeah, so I think he'll be a connecting piece. He's a good shooter. He's a good solid outside shooter. I don't think he's going to, create offense for anybody really, but the type of guy who's going to make the right play, can make the pass
Yeah.
to that, make the hockey assist, basically.
Great distinction between a traditional playmaker and somebody who just kind of moves the ball along and can function in an offense, which is
Yeah.
who I think of when I think of Kyle Anderson.
Yes. And I think so I was reading that and I thought I can totally understand that comparison. I don't think it's perfect, and I can't blame Kevin O'Connor because I was thinking for a long time and I can't really think of a perfect comparison because, well, I think Kyle Anderson is more of like a true point forward in ways. I don't see Tristan da Silva being a point forward so much as an intuitive forward who has some of those skills and uses them to his and the team's advantage.
Okay.
So some things I think I see him doing well is, yeah, like I said, being a good part of an offensive ecosystem that allows it to find success and to find the open guys. And I think he can be a pretty good piece in transition as well. So I think he's going to be a nice player, but, a rotational forward for a team who wants to bring in an older, ready to play guy. I'm not sure from a fantasy standpoint how much statistical output that's going to result in.
100% agree. I was thinking, I was like, yeah, Tristan da Silva is not really who you're looking to learn a whole lot about on a fantasy podcast. So shout out Tristan da Silva. Good luck in the draft. A player who does interest me more than maybe he's being projected when I was researching last couple of days is the point guard KJ Simpson. 6'2", 189. He's a junior. Ringer has him 35th, 47th at Hoop Intellect. He just kind of has that alpha like leadership quality to him. I think you get these two comps a lot for a player like that. Fred VanVleet, George Hill. But just these are players who I think George Hill's more like 6'5". He's a little bigger than Fred VanVleet, but the same idea in that, think about the Spurs this year from even a fantasy perspective. If they just had a functional point guard, now I love Jeremy Sohan, but that point forward experiment was goofy. And Tyus Jones is just kind of a guy. So yeah, I think someone like KJ Simpson could come in and help either a veteran team or a young team and could produce usable fantasy lines in the right setting, maybe as a streamer. But what do you think about KJ Simpson? He's an older player. He just looks really rock solid. Is he one of these guys that you think is a kind of a ready-made rotation piece or maybe a little more meat on the bones?
That's a good question. KJ Simpson's interesting, and from the perspective of somebody who watches a lot of college basketball and is not always great necessarily at accurately analyzing what a NBA role will be, he's like you said, very solid. He doesn't really make mistakes. I think hallmarks of a veteran point guard. He doesn't have any particular physical asset that stands out. He's not super fast. He doesn't have an incredible first step. He's not a great athlete, but he's just like a good, solid point guard who's competitive.
Yeah, give me a Derek Fisher sometimes. Where have all the Derek Fishers gone on NBA
there you
teams?
go. And he is small.
Stir the drink. Stir the drink.
Yeah. And so that's worth pointing out. I don't see any reason why he couldn't become like a rotational guard who's really solid in your second unit. It might not happen right away.
Yes.
I don't know.
Exactly. By the way, I said Tyus Jones earlier. I met his younger brother, Trey Jones. Tyus Jones is a little better player. But point stands. I think KJ Simpson's interesting. I said he was interesting. So that was our little team series. We did Kentucky. We did Colorado. So now we're going to get into a little segment that Caden and I came up with, which is just players who are sitting there on these big boards, kind of just hanging out, anywhere from, the very early teens to the low 30s. And these are players that we think might have star potential, aka Cam Whitmore's, players that maybe at one time were much higher on draft boards, and for whatever reason, and different reasons, they're lower, or just guys that we're interested in that we think could pop. So let's get into some of those names. We're going to call these the 2024 Cam Whitmores. The first one is definitely has the most pedigree on this list, and that is your boy Jacoby Walter. He is a freshman at Baylor, 6'5", 195. And again, he's pretty highly regarded. The Ringer has him 11th. Hoop Intellect has him 12th. So, it's somebody that is probably going to be a lottery pick. This really intrigued me, and I watched some film on him. I really thought he was very silky in the way that he shot the ball, very fluid, played with real fluidity, had a nice pull-up game. Let me pull this up. The Ringer had shades of Chris Middleton, which again is kind of 6'5", 195. So the outline is very Chris Middleton-ish. What's your take on this guy? Do you think he has star potential?
Yeah, it's an interesting case because there were times early on in the season where I know he was being regarded as like possibly a top 5 pick, maybe the first college player taken off the board in the draft, which we know is top heavy with European players and G League Ignite players. But and that's in no small part due to the fact, or due to how he started his season shooting. In the first half of the season, as a freshman, I should say, he came in and was shooting like 43% from three. And that wasn't all catch and shoot stuff. Like you said, he can create his own shot pretty well. He moves really smoothly. He looks like the type of guy who could, you could put in at shooting guard today and would play well in the NBA. And then in the second half of the season, his numbers just dipped entirely, to the point where he's now shooting like 36% or something. So it was a tale of two halves of the season. And so he has been pushed back a little bit. And he was one of my guys who I thought would have a shot at really reinforcing, higher end lottery status if he were to have like a really impressive NCAA tournament. Baylor didn't last super long in the tournament. That didn't happen. But in my view, the fluidity of his jump shot, his form looks really good. I have no reason to believe that his later season statistics are more indicative of what he's going to be in the NBA than what his earlier season statistics were. And if you at any point at 18, 19 years old are shooting 43% from three, to me, that means that there's something there. I think he can become a better shot or a better offensive initiator and creator for other players.
Okay.
But I think he's going to be a guy who can step in and knock down shots pretty much right away.
One of the things I've come across as far as areas of his game to improve is just his handle. His handle's a little loose. Maybe isn't one of the highlights of his game, and I think that's something he can work on. I mean, heck, Jaylen Brown's one of the best scorers in the NBA, and that guy can't dribble. So I don't know if I worry about that too much when scouting prospects from a fantasy lens or from a long-term lens, but still worth noting. So Jacoby Walter, Baylor, looking at like a late lottery pick. Okay, here's a guy that you pointed out to me actually, to maybe highlight here, and that is good old Carlton Carrington. Yes, that's Carlton Carrington. He is a freshman at Pittsburgh. The Ringer has him 27th. Hoop Intellect did not have him in the top 60. So quite a discrepancy there. Let's just start there. Is this a player where having a discrepancy that wide makes sense? And if so, why is that? Well, give me a little bit on your boy Carrington here.
Yeah. So first off, I would say that he probably wins the award for most likely to share a name with an 18th century English duke. Carlton Carrington.
Thank you for that. Well, we need a sponsor for that segment. We'll make sure that.
If you want to shorten it, he also goes by Bub Carrington.
I did see that, Bub. Yeah.
Yep. Hey there, Bub.
Wow.
So he's an interesting case because he came in as a rookie at Pittsburgh, not receiving any NBA draft attention at all. He just wasn't on the radar at all. And his very first game as a freshman, he had an 18-point triple-double.
Okay.
And immediately, suddenly, he was skyrocketing up draft boards, up big boards, right? And it makes sense. He's had sort of a streaky season. He's a streaky shooter. He has moments, he had a moment this year where he knocked down 7 threes in a game, but he also might go 0 for 7.
Okay.
He's got solid size for a guard. He's like 6'4", 6'5", probably.
He's
And the
6'5".
reason I put him here is because he is so intriguing to me. I'm excited to see what happens on draft night. We don't know for sure that he's going to declare and stay in the draft. I don't even know that for certain. It's probably going to depend a little bit on what his conversations with some teams have and what, gauging interest level from different GMs. And so it'll be really interesting to see if he joins the combine, if he tests those waters, and where he might get taken. Obviously, Kevin O'Connor has him as a first-round draft pick. This is the type of guy who I see probably taking on, becoming a guy who can get buckets on any given night, but is a little bit streaky as well.
Gotcha.
Here, I might even go like Bones Highland or something.
It's funny because the comp he has is big Lou Williams, and we had a player earlier that was comp to Lou Williams and Bones Highland.
There you go.
So it's a tempting comp. Lou Williams comes up a lot, and Bones Highland as well. I still am in on Bones. I hope that he can get it figured out. He's a skilled player. One concern from a fantasy perspective on Carrington is he posts an extremely low steals and blocks rate, which, you're not always looking for from a guard. And also Kevin O'Connor had written up that he doesn't really put much pressure on the rim. He's totally reliant on his jumper at this point. So, which looks beautiful from just a little bit I watched on him when you mentioned his name to me. But maybe he's not even in the draft this year. Go back, get yourself some reps.
Yeah, we'll see. I would suspect he declares, but we'll see. I think it's certainly possible that he's a very young player. He's exhibited an ability to do all sorts of stuff offensively. Obviously, you get a triple double. That means you can do some things. He's a streaky shooter, and you would hope that maybe you can rein that in a little bit. I'm not surprised if a bad team takes him early in the second round or something like that, in which case I think he could have pretty solid statistical output, you backing up Jordan Poole in Washington or something.
I'm going to go on a record right now, if anyone would ever remember this, and say that the next player I wanted to mention will have a better NBA career, and he's a bit of an enigma. He was a surprise one and done, and that is Miami's freshman Keyshawn George. Now, I watched about 5 minutes of tape last night, and then I read a little bit about him, but something about him really interested me. He's a 6'8", 205 pounds. It depends where you look. Ringer has him as a forward, Hoop Intellect as a guard. I'm really intrigued by that size at 6'8", his incredibly deep range. He profiles as a player. He can get defensive stats. And that's interesting to me as a fantasy player. So maybe I'm a little biased there. But Keyshawn George, again, a bit of an enigma, but somebody that really interested me.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always intriguing to have big shooters with range, but it can go both ways. I mean, we were talking about this the other day. A player who was taken, I think, a top 10 overall with a sort of similar profile is Kevin Knox, being like a 6'8" dude who can
Kevin
go and get his own shot, and
Shots fired.
it doesn't always pan out. So,
yeah.
And he is interesting for sure. I'll be interested to see what happens.
I'm not out on Kevin Knox. He will have his day. Another player I'm not out on, I'm just kidding, I'm out on him, is Brandon Boston. He's been buried on the Clippers bench. I still think he's going to eventually score 15 points for an entire season, not just only 15 points once. He'll average 15 points. But speaking of shooters, a player that you really wanted to talk about that is interesting, perhaps the oldest player in the draft, that is a senior. That is Terrance Shannon Jr., I believe, from Illinois, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so the Ringer has
No, go ahead. Sorry.
Ringer has him 32nd. Hoop Intellect did not have him in their top 60 or honorable mention. That video came out a month ago. I want to say it's the latest. It's the 3.0 of his big board over there at Hoop Intellect, but at that time, Terrance Shannon Jr. was still not on it. So I guess I'll start again like Carrington. Is there a reason for such a discrepancy, or is it just kind of marginal at this point, or do you see this guy as somebody who is floating beneath the radar and that we should really be interested in?
Yeah. So part of that probably is age. I think he's going to be 24 on draft night. Like that's not great. He played 3 seasons at Texas Tech, 2 seasons at Illinois. And I think something worth maybe pointing out here is that a big board and a mock draft function differently.
They do.
And so I don't know if Hoop Intellect, if you asked him if he would guess that Terrance Shannon gets drafted, but I just don't have him on my big board because this is more about what I see as player's potential down the road. Maybe there's something there just in terms of methodology with the two different approaches.
Okay.
I like Terrance Shannon as a win now late 20s pick by some team who needs a guy who can come off the bench, play a little bit of defense, and get some off the bench downhill scoring. He is like he's 24 years old. He's a competitor. He's strong. He's in his, he's in his adult body. He's ready to play today, and he can go up. He's a downhill offensive creator who is really good at finishing at the rim. I think, not to overuse the example, but similarly, Jaime Jaquez was an older player who's ready to come in and contribute and be gritty immediately. And I see Terrance Shannon as being somebody similar. I don't know that he'll have the immediate rookie success and impact that Jaime Jaquez has had, but I kind of see him within a similar mold.
Maybe it's just the name thing, but when you were talking, I was thinking about Shannon Brown as a downhill scorer off the bench. Remember Shannon Brown played for the Lakers. Fans really loved him, but he's somebody that really popped to the eye.
Yeah, he was one of the more impressive athletes in the world.
Exactly.
I'm not sure Terrance Shannon is that, but he's a lefty too, which is kind of fun. I think he's a guy that can come in and be part of a rotation immediately. And if you need some rotational scoring, he might just end up being that guy.
By the way, quick shout out to, just want to give a plug. So Hoop Intellect, the follow over on Twitter is Keandre as the main guy over there. So it's at Hoop Intellect. So make sure you're following him on Twitter. He's doing a lot of great work. So big shout out to you for all the work you're doing over there. So let's see here. So I think that does it. So Jacoby Walter, Carlton Carrington, Terrance Shannon Jr., and Keyshawn George. Those are the players that we identified as kind of in a bit of a Cam Mitmore mold as players that could be sleepers in the draft and maybe pop once they get an opportunity. Caden, are you ready for this?
I'm ready for this.
Let's go ahead and make a declaration now. We're going to declare this season's Great White. Now, this is something that Kate and I, just talking ball over the years, we came up with this concept. It's usually a 4-year American-born white player, and the outline is usually somebody who had a historic college career, and then, maybe they made the NBA, maybe they were a role player, maybe they weren't. I think in the 90s, great whites like Eric Montross, for instance, North Carolina, he was the 5th overall pick. He was a waste of a center. There was a lot more examples of really high great whites being drafted. Tyler Hansborough, if you move up a little bit, he had a functional NBA career, but he was a college superstar. Then you get the sharpshooters in there. You get your JJ Reddicks. You get your, I don't know if Grayson Allen counts. But yeah, these are the sort of players we're talking about. Anybody you want to give a shout out to, and then please do announce your official Great White for 2024.
Yeah. Okay. So as an example, last year when I was on the pod, we awarded Gonzaga's Drew Timme with the award.
Timme.
I think you could also give Adam Morrison that award in 2006.
Number 3 overall pick. You see, we've learned from great whites of the past.
Yes. Another one that comes to mind, just if I'm listing these off, Kyle Singler.
Oh, yeah.
Had an excellent career at Duke, won a national title, and kind of floated around the NBA a little bit. Probably most notably for the Lakers. They always seem to have somebody like this on their roster. So I'm tempted. I'm going to give an honorable mention to someone who's already been mentioned on the pod today, Hunter Dickinson of the Kansas Jayhawks, formerly of the Michigan Wolverines. Had a very good individual career, which was sadly finished early in the tournament this year. Although I'm going to give the actual award to another player whose career may have ended a little bit early in the tournament this year, who is likely to be a late first, early second round draft pick, Marquette Golden Eagles, Tyler Kolek.
Tyler Kolek, congratulations. I assume this is the highlight of your career and something you've strived for some time. So, I hope you enjoy it and savor the moment. So Tyler Kolek, he is this year's Great White. Like Caden said, he's a senior, just finished up at Marquette, 6'3", 195 pounds. The ringer has him 31st on the big board, hoop intellect 37th. So what are we getting into with Tyler Kolek? From an NBA perspective, what do we hope from him?
I think Tyler Kolek, your hope is an efficient and an efficient point guard who's able to get his teammates involved and who also can get his own jump shot. I think he projects reasonably well to be a rotational player. Again, it might not be in year one. It might take a little bit of time. But I think he's going to be able to be a guy who can distribute the ball really well. I've seen some talk about the possibility, maybe just matching up any competent point guard with Victor Wembanyama
There's a lot of talk of that.
is a dream. But him being a mature, well-rounded player who can get Victor and the other guys the ball reasonably well. Nobody else seems to be able to totally do that in San Antonio. That if they had, I'm not sure if San Antonio has an early second round pick, but if they do, then that's the kind of player that if he ends up in a situation like that, he might have some real like draft or lottery or fantasy potential.
Gotcha. So I guess the ceiling for a player like that would be Seattle Supersonic legend and Blaine Washington resident Luke Rittenauer without the flash.
Yes. Yeah, that's actually a pretty good comp. And shout out Luke Rittenauer for retiring after getting traded 6 times in one day.
That's a great. I forgot about that. Yeah, my favorite Luke Rittenauer moment is perhaps his career highlight. Last time the Seattle Supersonics were in the NBA playoffs was 2005, and I was about 20 years old. I was lucky enough to go to those games. Went to the first round games against the Kings, and then the Spurs in the second round. And Luke Rittenauer, in one motion, got a ball off a deflection, flung it behind his back from half court right into the running hands of Rashard Lewis for a dunk. And it happened so quick, it looked like an alley-oop, but it was one of the best behind the back flip passes you could ever ask for. So if you've never seen that pass from Luke Rittenauer, please go ahead and pull that up on YouTube right now. Shout out Luke Rittenauer. I actually had your oversized jersey for many years and eventually lost it. So
Oregon Ducks legend as well. We should give the shout out there.
Yeah, he got him to the Elite Eight, man.
Yeah, he helped really legitimate the Oregon Ducks program.
If you want to call it legitimate, yeah.
I almost wore my Beavers shirt, actually, but I didn't. I have a Beavers basketball shirt.
Anywhere that calls Gary Payton their best all-time player is cool with me. And Bones Berry, Brent Berry, another Sonic great. He went to Oregon State as well. And
shout out Jaquiz Rogers too, I believe.
we've reached the shout out portion of the podcast. so the next part is perhaps the meat and potatoes of this podcast. We are going to go through the NBA relevant players, or even just the relevant players. We'll give a shout out to players that maybe aren't prospects and talk about why they're not prospects for all 4 of the Final Four teams. So for UConn, for Purdue, for Alabama, and for NC State, we're going to go ahead and give a rundown of the draft profiles of those relevant players. Ironically enough, the number 1 overall seed of the tournament has perhaps the most intriguing collegiate prospect in my eyes. It's arguable, but he's in the conversation, and that is definitely 6'7", 190-pound freshman guard Stephon Castle. Stephon Castle is intriguing. I actually found 2 different listings for him. The Ringer had him 6'6" and 215, and Hoop Intellect had the 6'6", 215. Ringer had 6'7", 190. So that's 25-pound discrepancy and an inch discrepancy, which was kind of interesting. The Ringer had him number 2 on the big board. Hoop Intellect number 9. He just looks the part. He's one of these players that you watch him for a little bit and you're like, okay, yep, this is a future NBA star. But I know there's been some concerns about his tendency to kind of drift out of the offense and not be assertive at times. But man, he is perhaps the most interesting compilation tape watch in college basketball as far as athleticism. So Stephon Castle, what do we think of him?
Yeah. I think it's certainly possible that he ends up being the first collegiate player taken in the draft.
I
I
think he should
don't
be. I
think
think
that,
he should be.
yeah, I don't think that that's like a guarantee or
It's not.
anything,
No, he should be.
but there have been some concerns, like you said, with just like output. Typically a guy you see being one of the top 2, 3 picks, like you maybe expect to, not that this is the best way to evaluate a player, but you kind of, when you hear that and then you look at his box score, you might be a little bit underwhelmed.
Sure.
Um, but he's a big guard. He's athletic. I don't know that he has any particular like one skill set that projects to be elite in the NBA, but he does everything well. And he's a big guard, and that's a good thing to be. Um, so I'm curious, who does Kevin O'Connor liken him to?
Let me take a look. Well, I'm looking that up. So one thing I want to think about with Stephon Castle too is the context of the offense he plays in. And you got a 7'2" center who we'll get to very shortly.
Yeah.
He was also a high prospect. And then you have like I guess he's more of a stretch four. So you got some players taking up a lot of room, is what I'm saying on this team.
Yeah.
It's not cleared out and let Stephon Castle cook. It's a loaded team
Right.
structured very specifically, which is probably affecting his statistical profile in his freshman year.
He's had a little bit of injury problem early on as well.
Okay, so here we are. This is this is not Kevin O'Connor's best work. Shades of Markel Fultz or Anthony Black, who I really didn't care for, and I didn't know why he went number 6. So that's interesting. Jumbo-sized guard who can do it all and could have superstar upside if his jumper improves, which that's a good. I mean, that's what Markel Fultz was. So I guess what Markel Fultz could have been. Maybe the ceiling outcome on his career, if we did it 10 times, is what you're hoping for with a guy like Stephon Castle. But yeah, again, I mean, comps are tough, and they don't always tell the whole story. Exactly. So we're obsessed with them as we want to put things in the context we understand.
Yes,
but maybe he's just Stephon Castle.
It's essentially a metaphor. It's a commonplace way to understand the player. And it's kind of a necessary but imperfect method for doing so.
I thought his game reminded me a little bit of like a smaller DeMar DeRozan, just like kind of like a pure scorer, very tenacious, and not necessarily a super developed. From my understanding, he's not a great 3-point shooter. In high school, he is below sub 70% free throw shooter, so sub 70% from the free throw line. And routinely shot under 30% from 3. And then his freshman in UConn, once again, he's made below 30% of his threes. So yes. Yeah, there's some DeRozan in that statistical profile.
Yeah, and I think you made a good point about the style of offense that UConn runs and the way oftentimes the distribution of statistics in college basketball is just very different than in the NBA. And yeah, UConn's an interesting case because their most prolific player in terms of statistical output is their point guard and is a senior. And so you look at these two top 10 projected players, and neither of them blow you away with their statistical output. So that's something worth thinking about. I would suspect that Stephon Castle ends up having much improved or augmented statistics in the NBA than he does this year. I don't think you have to worry about him not averaging 10 points a game,
100%. Yeah, it's apples and oranges. I mean, really, they're the same sport, but they're played very differently.
Yeah.
And that's why people who are NBA junkies and just get into college basketball in March, sometimes they're not sure what they're looking at. And that's what makes players like we'll get into like Zach Edey so fascinating, because it's like a time capsule. It's like stepping into 1987 and watching how basketball used to be played. And that's one of the things I know that you love about college basketball, is it not?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to talk about him later.
So we will get to him. So Stephon Castle, I think we're both really high on him. The next guy, I'm really interested to hear your take. I'm always a little reluctant about this profile of player going too high. That would be Donovan Clingam, center, 7'2", 265 pounds, age 20. The Ringer has him 8th, and Hoop Intellect has him 17th. Obviously, he has been an integral part of one championship team, probably, maybe by the time you're listening to this, 2 championship teams, depending on when you hit play. But on the next level, like what do you see for a ceiling for this guy? His shades of was interesting. It's shades of Roy Hibbert, the Pacers center from those Paul George centric teams of about a decade or so ago. He's a huge man. He's a paint protector. He can swat the crap out of the ball. So from a fantasy perspective, we're interested in him because he can block shots. I don't know a whole lot about his shooting prowess. So how is he on the offensive end? Is he somebody who could potentially become a stretch 5, or is he really a traditional big at this point?
Maybe in between. I don't suspect he ever is going to be a stretch 5 in terms of he can pick and pop and be expected to put up, multiple threes a game. I could be wrong there. They're training people to do that now, but what works to his advantage is he's just a massive dude. And so he's really good at doing those things you want a massive dude to do, which is protect the rim, set really just devastating screens, and rebound the ball.
And save the country.
Yeah, of course. And he can also work as a bouncer outside a nightclub on the weekends or like during the off season.
Yes, yes, he could.
So I think he'll get taken high because he's really good at those things, not because you expect him to you're not going to expect to build your team around him per se, but rather he's really good at what he does, and those things are important. And so I know that we talked about not totally mentioning, discussing or guessing where players might end up, but I kind of see him as somebody who could be like a backup to Chet Holmgren or something if you want to get some greater interior presence in a backup center there.
I'd hope for more for him than rotting on OKC's bench, but fair enough. Whenever a player goes there, there's a little bit of a mental block for me. So
I'm sorry.
Don't apologize to me.
What I want to say is another thing about him is that for how big and massive he is, he's really smooth laterally. So I think there's not a ton of concerns about switchability on defense. I mean, obviously you don't want him guarding a guard, but I think he can hold up for himself there on defense. And I would say to me, he's more like a filled out Walker Kessler.
Oh, that's interesting. He's reminding me a little bit of like a Clint Capella, and that Clint Capella doesn't get enough credit for his fluidity. I mean, he's not a shooter, but all the way into his early 30s, he's very mobile. He's somebody that is an immovable object, but not super clunky. For what I've heard about Donovan Clingam, he is not just a big oaf out there,
Right.
And so exactly. So that's pretty intriguing, and I hope he gets a chance to start so we can get as much production out of him as possible. That's my selfish take as a fantasy guy.
And you're right. If you're talking about wanting to pick up blocks, he's a guy for that for sure. I'm not sure what he's averaging right now, but he's really intuitive around the rim, and he's just big, and he just moves people around. So he's good for that.
Yeah. So this team's loaded. Next player we're going to talk about is 6'8" sophomore forward, 210 pounds, and that is Alex Karaban. The Ringer has him 52nd. Hoop Intellect has him 43rd. I don't really have a great feel for him, as he seems like more of a kind of step out and knock down some threes kind of guy.
I love Alex Karaban as a college basketball player, and like pay attention to him this weekend. He's a really reliable 3-point shooter with range beyond just the 3-point line. And at 6'8", that's a nice asset to have. He's a very good offensive connecting piece. And I see him as a guy who just is a pretty lucid and cerebral basketball player who makes the right plays, knocks down open shots, and it just helps an offense move along in an effective and efficient way. Um, and so I think that he is kind of, to me, I don't know what kind of NBA career he'll have, but he seems to me to be kind of a plug and play guy off the bench, because he's just going to not get in the way. He's going to make the right plays, and at 6'8", he can stretch the floor. He also might end up being a guy who plays 4 years at UConn. I'm not sure what his plans are, but
Yeah.
And he's a sophomore. So I really like watching him. As somebody who enjoys watching college basketball, he's really a delight to watch. And I think he could be a reliable role player off the bench, his main role is, making the connecting passes and knocking down open shots, catch and shoot shots.
Okay, yeah, and this there's always a role for a guy like this. The Ringer has shades of George Niang, who his Jazz teammates at the time affectionately called the minivan, one of the best names for a marginal rotation player in the league, nicknames. What came to mind as well as a player like Ryan Anderson, who's since retired.
Yeah,
But
that's
just
a pretty good comp.
yeah, just a useful guy. I mean, he was just known as a guy who came in and launched threes, but he could move. He didn't get in the way of what you're trying to do on offense.
Yeah.
So yeah,
He's a
obviously,
pretty fluid athlete. I mean, he's not like an incredible athlete, but he moves well. I just see him being like a guy who can kind of find a role on a team somewhere, and it's not going to be super context specific where it might work. I think you can kind of just put
yes,
him in your rotation.
perfect. Did you want to touch on the point guard that you alluded to actually having the most offensive output on the team?
Yeah, sure. Tristan Newton, fifth year guy, one of the older
Wow.
players in the draft. Um, I he doesn't jump off the screen in any particular ways, but he is pretty prolific statistically. He's pretty efficient too. So I think he's a very, very good college basketball player, and I won't be surprised if he gets drafted in the second round. I'm not sure, as far as fantasy goes, whether he's worth talking about much more than that, because I don't know
Right.
if he finds real minutes in the NBA.
I think the most important part about bringing him up is just to again emphasize that the context of college basketball stats are not as much of an indicator as you would think into the production of the next level, because you got this team loaded with NBA prospects, and the player that's producing the most production as far as statistically speaking, I didn't see on either one of these big boards.
Yeah, I've seen talk of. I wouldn't be surprised if he gets taken very late or signs onto a team as an undrafted free agent and plays in the G League or something like that. You never know. Sometimes these players surprise you and they just find ways of making it work. That could certainly
True.
happen. But as far as fantasy goes, I'm not sure there's a whole lot to chew on here.
We will move on to Purdue, Caden. Let's go ahead and get into it. I think this is going to be an interesting segment for a lot of people who just want to hear a little bit more about Zach Edey. As far as when this all began and he showed up as a freshman, I thought of him as like the victory cigar. Like, he was just kind of it was interesting to see him come in and get some minutes, but I want to say he played around 5 minutes a game as a freshman.
Yeah.
And I didn't see this coming. Again, it's all in the context of college basketball so far, and up until this season, he didn't seem like anything more than a Luka Garza type as far as the interest of the NBA. So for those that don't know, Zach Edey is a 7'3", 308-pound center for Purdue. He is 22 years of age at this point. He's a junior or a senior?
He's a senior.
Okay, he's a senior. So we have a nice discrepancy here. The Ringer has Zach Edey 17th on their big board, Hoop Intellect at 38th. The Ringer likens Zach Edey to Ivica Zubac, which is interesting. They kind of have a similar vibe, I'll say, and obviously Zubac is not quite as imposing. But some of the things that you've told me, and then I'll let you kind of just give the diatribe on Edey, and if you want to make the case for him as an NBA player that either could just produce off the bench or potentially could be a starting center in the right situation. He does move more fluidly than you would think. He has a really nice post game. And Zubat sometimes will surprise you because he can put some moves on you. But again, you can only play him around 22 minutes a game. Zubats has always been a part-time player, although intriguing for fantasy when he gets the run. So do you like that comp as far as what he could be statistically? And then just talk a little bit about his development and how he's gotten to this place to be 17th on the Ringers big board. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't hate the comp. It's hard to find a comp for a guy like this, especially because the NBA has a handful of guys who NBA fans are very affectionate towards, who are of similar builds.
Boban.
Yeah, exactly. Taco Fall is another example of like this, just kind of a fun profile of a guy. And interestingly, people sort of take an opposite feeling towards Zach Edey, who inspires a lot of negative affects. I mean,
It's just not very
are
fun.
upset with how much success he's had individually. A lot of people don't think it's very fun to watch. I happen to like really enjoy it. But so Zach Edey's an interesting case because he grew up in Toronto with aspirations of becoming a professional hockey player.
Okay.
This is where he develops like his really swift footwork. And you've pointed out his feet are slow. This is true. And that's going to be a major problem at the NBA level. He doesn't move super quickly, but the footwork itself is very almost poetic. It's very swift. It's very precise, and this is a consequence of having grown up playing hockey and learning to ice skate in Canada. Interestingly enough, once he became sort of too tall for hockey, he developed a pretty promising young career as a pitcher for a baseball team.
Okay.
He was still tall for his age, but then one year he grew like 10 inches and it entirely screwed up his pitching form, and he was developing issues, injuries and things like that. So he finally, like as a sophomore in high school, caved into demands and decided to join the basketball team.
Okay. And so that's why his love for the game really pours out in his post-game interviews.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
It's
so
a late addition.
Worked out for him. One where the size is an asset, totally. And I think he's got a chip on his shoulder. He was like not ranked up in the top like 400 or something from his high school draft class, and now he's a two-time NCAA Player of the Year. Like, and so it's probably really frustrating when people just say you're just tall. That's all that there is. It's not quite true. My pitch for Edey in the NBA is, as someone who can maybe help a team change pace in brief moments, give different looks. It's still going to be really hard to defend Zach Edey for anybody in the NBA. I think he's just so big. He's just so imposing. He's just so strong. He's got nice finesse, and you can't just foul him because he's a good free throw shooter. And so what the problem is going to be on the opposite end of the floor. He's the type of player who can become entirely exploited.
Churn style.
Yeah, absolutely. Even at the college level, he's at times not an excellent rim protector. And sometimes actually chooses not to pursue blocks for the sole purpose of staying out of foul trouble, which is an interesting strategy. You'll watch him just avoid an opportunity to try to get a block at times.
Okay.
And so I think at the next level, if there's an NBA team who says we can in quick bursts give our center a rest, entirely give a new look to our offense, and hopefully in a quick enough burst that the other team can't just entirely game plan and exploit him on the defensive end, then I think that there's a role, there's a niche for him. I wouldn't take him in the middle first round. It just seems like there are too many players there who can have a greater, who are better suited to help your team win games.
Yeah.
I could totally see him going somewhere in the mid-second round. That makes sense to me. As the guy who's probably not going to get a ton of playing time, but might just, if he's not worried about foul trouble and things like that, might be a good rim protector for a couple minutes if he's not having to get switched out onto quick guards and things like that. So I think that he can carve out a little niche, but I certainly don't expect him to be a star. And I think 17 is pretty ambitious.
Agreed. I'm going to hop into the time machine here. My comp for him is the great Dwayne Shinsis. Do you recall Dwayne Shinsis?
I don't.
He was drafted in 1990 by the Spurs. He was a 24th overall pick. And he just was a very skilled 7'2", 260-pound imposing center. And because the skill was hard to figure out what to do with, he bounced around quite a bit. He played for the Nets from 92 to 95 and had some really nice statistical seasons there. I think you can actually, he's on NBA Jam Tournament Edition on the expanded rosters. And he's really fun to play with. His career statistics are nothing to look at, but it's a guy to look into because he had great footwork. He was slow. He had very distinctive mullet, which was cool. Beautiful mullet. But yeah, Dwayne Shinsas, he played for 10 seasons throughout the 90s. So it's a shout out to the great Dwayne Shinsas.
How about another possible comp? Bryant Reeves.
Big Country is a good comp. Yeah, he was a more skilled Dwayne Shinsas.
Yeah.
Shinsas went to Florida. So if you're a Florida Gators fan, shout out. He played there 4 years. So just interesting. I think sometimes the comps, there's a lot of recency bias because you don't need people Googling Dwayne Shinsas or trying to say it on a podcast. Did you, Caden, want to give a quick shout out to your boy Braden Smith?
Yeah, this is my prediction, is that in 2 years' time, when I'm doing this podcast episode again, and I'm inducting another player into the hallowed halls of the Great White Hall of Fame. My prediction is it's going to be Purdue's very own Braden Smith, who as a sophomore this year was first team All Big Ten, has a possibility to win a national title this year. They're returning a lot of talent, albeit not Zach Edey next year. I believe that Trey Kaufman-Wren will be given the keys to the offense in the paint, and that Purdue will continue to be very good during Braden Smith's time here. And I think he will have enough accolades to be in consideration in 2 years.
You're seeing the beginning of a player who's amassing a great white resume.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's not going to be an NBA player.
Right.
But he's going to be a fantastic college basketball player.
So file that name away. He's going to send in his application packet to the committee, and we will review his case in 2 years' time. So that was your UConn section and your Purdue section. These next two sections are going to be a little bit shorter. Let's start with Alabama. Let's start with senior point guard Mark Sears, 5'11", 186, so not the height you're looking for. Very interesting discrepancy here. It's the widest technically. The Ringer has Sears 19th on their big board, and I comb through this a lot. Hoop Intellect does not have him in the top 60 or on their 60 player honorable mentions list. So I guess not in the top 120 if you want to look at it that way. And obviously these things aren't finalized by any means. But the comp is interesting, and I think it's a comp we're going to see a lot for 5'11" point guards who show playmaking prowess and look like leaders and show a clutch gene. And that's shades of Jalen Brunson over at the Ringer. Let's talk a little bit about Sears. Obviously, he plays with incredible pace. He plays under control. He's probably profiling as a very skilled NBA backup point guard, but you've watched more games than me overall. What are you thinking about Sears as far as is the Brunson projection more about the player he was at Villanova and not saying he could become an NBA All-Star, or how do you feel about this comparison? And
yeah, it's interesting because I think sometimes when we read these, we get caught up in the career that somebody has had, and the player comparisons are for the most part not intended to project somebody's career output so much as to say this player fits a similar archetype as somebody who's more recognizable.
Such an important point.
Yeah. And so Kevin O'Connor is certainly not saying I expect Mark Sears to be a future All-Star, to be a Jalen Brunson level player, but he's saying this is an archetype that people are familiar with. And so if you want to familiarize yourself with this player, think Jalen Brunson. And I think it's a pretty good, if imperfect, comparison. Obviously, their form, their shape as basketball players is very similar. Both short, sort of robust bodies who can play bully ball at the point guard position. They're strong, they're squat, And they're both, like you say, play under pace. They use what they have, what their body provides as an advantage to get to their spots and to do what they need to do. It's very similar in that regard. In other regard, I don't think he has, the footwork that Jalen Brunson has. I'm not sure he's ever going to be the level of shooter that Jalen Brunson is, but I can totally understand the comp. I really enjoy watching him play, and obviously it's panning out at this point. He's helped lead his team to the Final Four, where they'll be taking on the UConn Huskies. So yeah, I think he could reasonably be a backup point guard in this league. It's just going to be having to overcome some height disadvantages, which he's already done in college, and so maybe he'll be able to do that just fine.
Yeah, really well put. And I'm really glad that that's a very important point, that we're not projecting out when we're doing this work. And Kevin O'Connor's not saying, okay, well, we think this player is going to progress into an all-star like Jalen Brunson did. It's just the outline of the player.
Yeah. And an example here that I can point out too is one that I remember getting a lot of pushback from NBA fans was a handful of years ago, Rui Hachimura getting a Kawhi Leonard comp. And
right.
A lot of people are upset about this, saying like, you can't really expect him to be as good as Kawhi. That's unreasonable. And having to try to explain to these people that, no, he's just saying this is a strong 6'8" forward with defensive instincts who, if he can figure out offensively how to shoot and things like that, could be a really, really good player. He plays a similar style as Kawhi Leonard.
What's funny about that now is he's all offense, no defense.
Yeah.
Rui Hachimura. I mean, that's how it panned out in the league. But yeah. Okay, I have a confession.
Let's hear it.
I have a confession. I am starting to believe in Devil's Lake, North Dakota's finest. Grant Nelson. He is a senior. He's 6'11" and 230. He was a transfer. This is his first year, I believe, with Alabama, right? From North Dakota State. Man, I mean, just the statistical profile and just to play with it here. So in 36 games and 25 minutes at Alabama in a loaded SEC conference, 12 points, 5.6 rebounds, 1.6 dimes, 1.6 blocks, 1.6 steals. And here's the most telling number: 81% from the free throw line, 49% from the field, only 27% from three. It's interesting to me. I mean, he's not a string bean. He's skinny. But maybe it's the recency bias of watching him in the tournament. Can't wait to see him play against UConn on Saturday. I think this guy could be an NBA player. I do. So Nelson was on the honorable mentions list for Hoop Intellect. He is not on the big board, top 60 for the Ringer. And the honorable mention, again, is just a list of 60 players who didn't make the top 60 at Hoop Intellect. So talk me out of this. It's just one of these runs that I'm being swept under. The offensive profile and skill set of this guy is super fantasy friendly. If he was able to carve out 20 to 24 minutes for a team somewhere at some point, I'd be interested to see it.
Okay. Well, here's somewhere to start off. Here's a jumping point.
Okay.
He declared for the draft after last season and withdrew his name after not receiving much interest.
Right.
That doesn't mean that you can't play another season and then reestablish yourself as somebody who is draftable. I mean, you just mentioned this with Zach Edey, right? He wasn't really getting any looks last year, and now he's getting first round looks. You know, so you can change opinions, and certainly going and playing in a very tough SEC conference and finding success, and then finding more success in the tournament is a boon to his draft prospects. We talked about this the other day. I was a bit more dismissive of him being drafted. You were, I think, optimistic about it. So let's talk about it. You mentioned his stock stats, which are great. He certainly has an aptitude as a rim protector here at the college level. I just don't know how much I expect that to translate. Yeah. And I think that's a very important part of who he is as a player at the current level that he's playing in the NCAA. So it depends, I think, a little bit on your assessment of how well you think something like that's going to transfer. Again, you mentioned he's not a string bean, but he's skinny. People are bigger, stronger, meatier, in the NBA than they are in college basketball. So there's just, to me, it's like it just gets a little bit more difficult at every single level at the NBA, and I'm not confident that he'll get drafted.
Let
All
me
the
ask you
time people
this.
sign people all the time people go undrafted and then have, solid careers. It's not impossible. But I just think it's like an older player who is maybe more marginal on whether he's going to carve out a role or not. I suspect he's maybe a draft night free agent signing to some team somewhere and maybe signs a two-way contract. That's kind of what I suspect will happen.
That's all fair. Let me ask you the question that everybody's wondering. Let's just get to it. If Grant Nelson shaves that paper thin dirt on his lip, does he just go back to 12th man off the bench?
It might be. That's like it's like Mike, but he has he's rocking Michael Jordan's mustache from the 90s, and so it imbues him with the power of the Jordan. I don't know.
I think
There's something about the mustache though that has found tournament success in recent years.
Yeah, you can't say it hasn't. So don't shave that thing, Grant Nelson. You look young enough. So
it'll be interesting if he holds up really well against Donovan Clingam. Who knows?
yes,
Maybe some opinions are readjusted a little bit about
right.
him, which would be impressive. And then it would maybe give him a shot at Zach Edey too.
I'm going to ask you here, Kaden, about a player who's unranked everywhere. He's been the darling of the tournament. He puts a smile on your face when you watch his post-game interviews or watch him play, and the joy that DJ Burns was exuding as it became clear that NC State was going to knock off Duke, a 4 seed who frankly didn't belong in the Final Four, and I'm glad they didn't make it, but I'm showing my bias. Nobody needed Duke to sneak in another Final Four with this squad. And so DJ Burns saved America. What makes somebody like DJ Burns not even on the NBA's radar when some other big guys with similar challenges are on the NBA's radar? I mean, is it just this guy's feet are stuck in quicksand and he has some skill? Because he is very skilled. Why no tractor trailer buzz with somebody like this? Not that panned out, but how come we're not looking at him as a potential pick in the 40s of the draft?
Yeah, fair enough question. First off, I would just want to point out that yes, your lead in to DJ Burns Jr. is great. So fun to watch. This is part of why I love college basketball is the skill level is more diverse. It's less homogenous in a way that you can see a guy in a body that doesn't look like a basketball player's body find a lot of success. He's just massive in every aspect of the word. He's wide. It's just fun to see a guy like that succeed at this level.
Yes.
He's got pretty good finesse. He's got good touch. He's pretty good jumper wise from about 17 feet in.
Totally.
And so I can understand like it's really intriguing. And so maybe what I'll do is liken him to a recent player who similarly has an outlying body in terms of the types of players who generally find success in the NBA, and that's Kenneth Lofton Jr.
And you mentioned that to me. I'm thinking like ceiling could be like Al Jefferson. In 2006, DJ Burns is going to get steamed up to the late first round. As recent as 2000, as the mid-aughts. Just players like this. Kenny Lofton Jr. He's an enigma. NBA Twitter is obsessed with him because we love players like a Bol or a Taco Fall or Kenny Lofton Jr., who just have weird bodies. Let's be honest; they just have fascinating bodies. It's just fascinating to see them try to navigate the NBA with that body. And that's
in some ways it works to your advantage. In some ways, not. I mean, I remember watching Kenneth Lofton Jr. playing in as a rookie playing in Las Vegas in the preseason,
yes,
NBA preseason, and he was bullying people.
Summer
I
League.
mean, that's a body that can move people.
Yes.
And DJ Burns has a similar body that can just move people because the center of gravity, there's so much mass there that they move people and they're impossible to move. You can't budge them.
I can relate. I have a body that can move people too, but it's more emotional.
Yeah. And so it's interesting because you watch Kenneth Lofton Jr. in the NBA preseason, and he was one of the best players in it. But it's hard to carve out a role in the NBA when I just don't think you can leverage that particular skill set or that particular asset as well on these bigger, stronger players. And then also the disadvantages of having that particular body become more apparent and can become more easily exploited with the very best basketball players in the world being in the NBA. And Kenneth Lofton Jr. is an interesting example as a guy who won G League MVP. So you step it down just a couple levels from NBA, and he's one of the best players out there. But just at the next level, I don't know who Kenneth Lofton Jr. is going to defend. I don't know how these people are going to be able to navigate screens with, guards coming out. It's harder to push around a Steven Adams or a Zion Williamson or Ivica Zubac than it is some of these other guys that you might be playing in the G League. And so I don't doubt that DJ Burns Jr. or Kenneth Lofton Jr. on any given night could get you buckets in the NBA. I just don't know that they can do it as consistently. And I think that they will, their disadvantages and their weaknesses will be more regularly exploited than they are at the levels slightly below the NBA.
On behalf of all of America who's fascinated by DJ Burns right now, I want to thank you for your dose of realism.
But that doesn't mean go watch him and enjoy him
please.
and get buckets. Like that's a matchup with two crazy basketball bodies, DJ Burns and Zach Edey. Like, go enjoy the weird freak show that is this Final Four matchup, and
it's going to be great. I'm so excited
about
it.
It's going to be a lot of fun.
It's players like DJ Burns and Kenny Lofton Jr. that have me tempted to start the first NBA Summer League fantasy league. Like, it would be complete.
Yeah, there you go. That would be fun.
It'd be complete madness. But yeah, those are the sort of names. So those are the guys from the Final Four that we wanted to cover today. I got a couple surprise names for you, Kate, and a couple intriguing guys for fantasy in particular. I alluded to this draft having a lot of centers, and I was saving this one in the holster as a player that jumped off the screen when I was watching tape of him last night. And that is Indiana center Kel'el Ware.
Kel'el Ware.
Kel'el Ware, thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. Formerly of the Oregon Ducks.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yep. Sorry, Ducks fans. Yeah.
Yes. He had maybe a sort of disappointing season there. He came in as like a player who was going to be a lottery pick. It didn't really work out in Oregon. So then he's in Indiana. Indiana didn't have a great season either. He's a really intriguing prospect as a dude. What's he listed at? 6'11"?
He's listed at 7 feet, 242 pounds.
Yeah. He's long and athletic and pretty smooth. To me, this seems like a guy who's like has a for sure role in the NBA.
Oh yeah, and
he's getting looks. Where does the Ringer have him? Probably in the 20s somewhere.
22nd.
Yeah, I kind of am higher on him than that, but as I think as a potential stretch big who has a lot of skills to go around, I think Kel'el Ware will find a role somewhere and that he'll have a solid NBA career.
I have him and Missy from Baylor kind of lumped in the same area. Missy has 21st on the Ringer's big board and Ware is 22nd. The shades of Miles Turner comp for Ware is, I was salivating at that. There are some motor concerns with him, but I feel like a player like this is going to be worth a mid-teens pick for somebody.
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah. Where did Hoop Intellect have him? Do you remember?
25th.
25th. Yeah. So maybe the consensus is somewhere in the 20s, and that means there's going to be a playoff team adding another solid player to their team. I think really, if he participates in the NBA Combine and impresses in certain areas, I think there's no reason he couldn't move up onto the fringe of the lottery.
Yep. This is one player that I want fantasy players to file away. Let's see where he lands, but just screamed NBA scorer to me, and that's USC guard Isaiah Collier.
Mm-hmm.
Really interesting. He's a pretty thick 6'4", 210 stout combo guard. The Ringer has him 16th. Hoop Intellect has him 8th. I'm going to look into it more as the draft approaches. I think I'm a little closer to 8 than I am 16 on him. But he just looks the part. He just the tenacity that he was able to get to the hoop with, his handle is sick. He was likened to Tyreek Evans or Emmanuel Mudiay. I was huge on Emmanuel Mudiay when he came out. I thought he was going to be really good, and it just didn't work out. But yeah, this kid is fascinating to me, and I'm really going to be interested to see how the pre-draft process plays out. But I have Isaiah Collier circled.
Yeah, that's a great guy to have circled. USC just had a really weird season.
Oh,
They had sort of high expectations. They signed Bronny James.
yeah,
And at a time they looked pretty good early in the season. And there was a time when Isaiah Collier was um, getting like uh, top three draft pick sort of attention,
right.
as looking like a guy who can just like really initiate an offense. Um, he can be a little erratic. I mean, he's going to have to try to rein in some of the tenacity, I think, a little bit. Um, and he can be an inefficient scorer at times. He's got to work on his jump shot a bit. But as a guy who, like, again, during the season, this isn't preseason, at a point during the season, some people were talking about being a number one overall pick, falling backwards to out of the lottery is kind
Right.
of wild to me. There clearly are some concerns. Um, but man, yeah, I'm excited to see what continues to happen. I don't know, with the fact that he's this questionable and there's this much of a range and how much he's fallen, I wonder, I suspect he might actually participate in some combine stuff, which maybe
Right.
he wouldn't have if he was still getting like top 3 nods. Because those players tend to avoid it so that they don't do anything to damage sort of their projection or draft expectations. So maybe he will. I would like to see that. I would circle that. This is certainly a player who I think can be can have can be statistically productive in the NBA.
Yep.
Whether he ends up being a totally plus player or not remains to be seen. But I do see him as actually as at least having some statistical output, and that could be a good thing for fantasy. I don't know how much, you know, efficiency or turnovers and things like that play into fantasy scoring. So I can't really speak to that, but
Yep.
he'll score and he'll get assists and he'll get minutes as well.
He definitely seems like any guard that comes into the NBA and is going to struggle with efficiency issues. So the percentages can be rough in a 9 category league, but in a points format, like a points league where there's no percentages, it's just accumulative points and they're different formats. In particular, I'm going to have him circled. Like I have been in a points league where I just took home the title and I have a trophy waiting for me in Oregon that we engraved
Nice.
the name on every year. And I haven't won that since 2016. Was going to win it in COVID, but that was taken from me. I was in first place. That wasn't the worst thing that was taken from anyone during COVID. But yeah, so in a points league, Isaiah Collier of USC, circle him. He has efficiency issues. He's going to have to tone down some of the creativity in his game and fit into an NBA scheme. But man, yeah, he jumps off the page for me. So yeah, I think that about covers it. I'm really excited to watch the tournament. One of the reasons I love doing this podcast with you and prepping for it is it just like makes this time of year. I feel like I'm so much more locked in, and I'm picking up more nuance and gaining more information rather than just kind of watching the game. So I'm a lot more excited to watch the Final Four now that we've done this.
Yeah, cool. And especially those UConn games, they got 4 potential guys getting drafted this year. So again, I encourage you and anybody listening to like watch those games, look at what Stephon Castle looks like as a player, but also I encourage you to watch Karaban. And I'd be interested to see what your assessment is there of his ability to be a potential rotational player in the NBA.
I will take my
I think
assignment
you enjoy
seriously.
just watching his game.
I will make sure to, because I know you're going to ask about it. So, Caden, where can people find you on the old Twitter machine?
Yeah, so my Twitter account is at Lil Aristophanes. So I'll have to spell that out for you. Aristophanes, ancient Athenian playwright. So it's Lil, as in Lil, and then Aristophanes, Aristophanes.
Thank you for that.
Also, look for this coming soon. The inaugural issue of my new magazine, Craig, the magazine, will be coming out next week on Monday. So you can look for that on my Twitter account as well. And there will be an accompanying website where you can check out the different stories that are included in there. Really excited about it. The more eyes we can get on that, the better.
Really happy for you, man. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Caden is an example of a person who knows what they want in life and they're able to get it, whether it be jewels, or women, or baskets of fruit, or college degrees. No, I always enjoy talking hoops with you. You can find me on Twitter, old Flyin J, of course, at Quano Physics, a name that's similar to Caden's, but not rooted in anything as cool. Of course, PTJ is an independent fantasy basketball podcast for the people. Please do rate, review, share, and subscribe. If you like what you hear, we really appreciate it. It helps a lot. If you're consuming this on YouTube, go ahead and engage with us in the comments. We'd love to hear your takes on some of these players. It's always fun to engage that way, and I'll make sure to get Caden into the comment section so you can get real feedback from a real college hoops head. So Caden, we really appreciate you being on today. For Caden today, this is your boy Flyin J, and we will talk to you all soon.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
We will see you next year. Well, I'll see you sooner, but